Thank you so much for coming to check out another episode of the Stash Cast, where we have interesting conversations with interesting people focused on the world of commercial real estate and prop tech. The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict transactions before they occur? You can with Needle. Come check it out at Needle, NEDL.us to learn more. All right, today I have a fellow commercial real estate veteran and startup founder, Val Despard. And Val, thank you so much for being here. Val is the director of financial analytics for Newmark, the enemy, but we're going to give him a pass because he focuses on office. And he's also the founder and CEO of Despard Analytics. So Val, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was particularly, you and I first connected a few months ago. I don't remember the specific circumstances, but I was intrigued with what you're doing and what you're working on. So maybe let's start with that. Talk to us about your company and what you guys are trying to do in commercial real estate.
Yeah, I started as an analyst in 2007 as a full-time employee of a brokerage team in Atlanta, and really developed those skills over a number of years through the 2009, 2010 when things were really tough. Just was happy to have a job. Saw the good times in both 07, caught the tail end of the good times, and saw the bad times in 09, 2010, 2011. Just saw a lot of transactions. Working for a brokerage team can be good because you see a lot of transaction volume and get a feel for different submarkets and dynamics. And then 14 was just looking to make some extra income, and it happened organically. It was somebody I knew that needed a quick model, and realized I could make, I think it was like $100 or something for something quick. And a light bulb went on, realized I could just do something that's in my wheelhouse, make some extra money. And then that led to another referral, and then people were looking for this kind of work. It wasn't hard to grow it organically. And then really was just doing it on my own as a solo contractor analyst for a number of years. And then was trying to figure out how to grow the platform with maybe a team under me, like a junior analyst or two, maybe offshore. I was trying to figure out the model. And then at some point, I brought on a senior analyst, or somebody who could do it, just soup to nuts, the whole thing without and go direct to the client. And then another light bulb went off. Realized that was the model, where the senior analyst, kind of a consulting model, the analyst can go directly to the client. They don't need to be funneled through a pyramid, or it didn't need to be controlled by me. And then so once we figured that model out, we just kept adding analysts. And then the clients see the value proposition. Usually they might see it initially, but they really see it when they hire us, because you get access to senior level analysts who know the property type. They don't need to be trained, and deliver good work for lower cost than maybe like a full-time hire. So it's just the value proposition kind of sells itself, and we've just grown with 10 years in business at this point.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it started off, you just churned out a model for somebody, and then you said, okay, I think I can monetize this in a bigger way. So are you guys doing like custom models every time, or is it specific to one product? I assume it started with office and then it's evolved into the other product types?
Yeah, it started with office, and then retail, a little bit of retail, and then multifamily came in there. I had experience with all three of those, and then now we've branched out into self-storage. I think I created a template for self-storage. Never done it before. Now
Is that different from multifamily?
Not really. I mean, a little bit, but not. Yeah, it's very similar. Very similar underwriting. You might have some ancillary income from RV parking. The unit mix looks different, obviously. There's just some like nuances, but the model itself looks very similar. But yeah, it happened organically. Somebody would come in and get a lot of referrals, just because real estate is so networked that we've never had a ton of success going cold to people, like cold emails or just messaging cold. The more kind of relational or organic it is, the better it seems like in our industry, because everyone knows so many people. And so when someone comes in cold, you're like, I know so many people, I don't know you. But so referrals have been huge for us. And then clients are very sticky with us. So once we get connected, and like to your question about the templates, like we we usually have a template that we can start with, whether it's ours or the clients. And then there might be some mixing and matching of tabs and customization, but that's the first step, is take what we have, customize it, tweak it a little bit, run the first deal. And then as we run deals, maybe we're tweaking that template a little bit, but that tends to be the process. We're rarely do we build something from nothing. Usually we have something to start with. Saves a lot of time on the front end. And then it's really about what the client likes to see, what they're used to seeing. They might have a template that they like the look of the kind of outputs, but we go in and improve the inputs.
So it's not just a basic income and expense model that you're doing and applying a cap rate. You're integrating the debt terms. And are you also doing waterfalls for syndications and things like that?
Yeah, we do waterfalls. We've done like fund waterfalls. We can do project waterfalls. So we can really do the whole thing. We can do pitch decks as well if you're raising equity. It all kind of ties in together. But yeah, we're doing the debt, maybe a refi. We're doing projections of cash flows over 5, 10 years. We do look at the as-is NOI and the returns going in. And then we'll look at the whole period and what that looks like with a bunch of assumptions. And so, yeah, we try to it's always a balance. I think most of our clients are in the mid-market real estate world. It's not really institutional. We're not working on $50 million acquisitions with 100 tenants typically, where it's the kind of the 5, 10, $20 million transaction. And so we're trying to marry the complexity where you're accurate and detailed and insightful, but with simplicity where somebody can pick it up and know where to look. And there aren't these crazy formulas that get broken quickly when you're looking at the model, and something that's like kind of intuitive, but also detailed. That's what I'm usually when I do a model, and everyone's got their own style, but mine are every tab in the Excel model, whether it's even if we're exporting Argus into the model, like we have an Excel, a deliverable is usually the Excel model, and then Argus is a backup. But every tab has a simple purpose, like rent roll tab does one thing. Your hold IRRs for each hold period does one thing. Like it's like you don't have a tab with 5 places to look. So again, we're trying to marry that simplicity with the complexity kind of in the background.
That's amazing. I've never had the pleasure of working with Argus, but can you maybe expand upon that and I guess how your modeling is different than that? And I'll just caveat that, like when I was first getting into the business, it was 2000. I graduated college in 2006, and I tried to make the rounds. And Argus seemed to be a requirement to get in, and I'm a psychology major, so I wasn't that guy. And so I've never. I think I've seen it, but everyone was like, "Oh, you got to know how to do Argus runs," and it was I don't know $1,000 or something for the license, and I was like, "What is this?"
Yeah, we do quite a bit of Argus. I feel like it's a big reason why we've gotten hired over the years. We have 3 licenses now. They're cloud licenses, so we can jump in, jump out of it as we need to. And then but it usually, even if we do an Argus model, the cash flows are pre-debt and they drop into an Excel template. It's typically how people use Argus. We only use Argus for,
Why not just do it in Excel? Like, why use Argus? I guess I don't understand what it is.
Yeah, I've tried creating an Excel model that does similar thing. It gets really complex when you start doing the probabilities on tenant rollovers and applying market leasing assumptions. You realize why Argus exists. It's really helpful for like office, retail, industrial, especially multi-tenant. If you have a single tenant deal, you can definitely do it in Excel. Another reason is it's a very shareable type of software. Like you have an Argus model, let's say you're a brokerage firm and you run an Argus model, investors are going to ask you for the Argus model. So it's a very shareable thing. That's why I think it's hard for competitors to really create something that competes with Argus, because everyone's sharing these Argus models over. And it's ages well too. Like you can run an Argus model, 6 months later, pick it up, tweak it, save it, and it all saves in the Argus cloud. And then you can export it into Dropbox folders if you want to. But I've always liked Argus for that reason. When you weigh those rollover probabilities, it's really hard to do in Excel. I'm sure people have figured that out and do a better job. But even then, let's say you have somebody that does an Excel model that does that, I can't really send it to you and you intuitively know how to use it. I could train you and teach, but then there's ramp up cost. Nobody wants to learn a new kind of model or software. So our Argus has just become this kind of industry standard, especially for commercial property. We don't use it for multifamily. We don't use it for development. I think you can, and I haven't come across people using it for that, but we do use it, especially for the multi-tenant commercial deals.
I've heard it's really cumbersome because don't you have to enter each individual lease? And so that's just impractical on an 800 unit deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why with multifamily, we just do it in Excel. Yeah, I'd be curious if someone loves to use Argus for multifamily. I'd love to hear if there is. I know you can do it. I just never come across anyone doing it.
They're probably a glutton for punishment, I guess, if they're doing that.
Putting in each lease with the expiration date, and then you have market rent. Yeah, man, you can do that in Excel to some degree because you only have a year. Each lease is only a year, so it's conducive to doing it. Even if you want to get that detailed, you can still do it in Excel, I think. And
so let's maybe assume that some of our listeners are novices or newer to the business. Let's just talk about the basic analysis of properties. You've got the income, you've got super simply, you have income less vacancy gives you your effective gross. You may have some additional income in there. Then you have expenses that we will benchmark against what we're seeing as standards or how we think it should run. And then you subtract the expenses from the income, which gives you your net operating income. Yeah, your NOI. And then from there, so that's the simplest version. And then you can make it more complicated by applying the debt terms, which if you're buying it with a loan, you should. And then that will give you your cash on cash. And you can then calculate your internal rate of return. I guess if it's that simple, why would somebody need you guys?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good point. So just the time involved in looking at a rent roll, thinking through, let's say it's a retail deal. Every space has probably somewhat of a unique market rent because where it's located in the center, and then how is it doing with health ratios and thinking through. There's so many nuances to each asset class. With office, are there any dark spaces where the tenant's still paying rent but they're subleasing? And then what do you assume on that rollover? And then do you include if what are the known vacates, so that when you look at your going in NOI, you're excluding the known vacates? What are your renewal probabilities if there's a tenant, maybe you have an anchor tenant and it's a year out, 2 years out? Like how would you acquire a property when you have an anchor tenant hanging out there? You don't know if they're going to renew it. So do you run different scenarios? So that's where it gets complex, nuanced. And really that's where, as you're going in cap rate 6.5 or 7.5, that's those little variance details make the difference in investment. Also looking at any model is really driven by, there's 4 or 5 things in any model. It's like market rent, it's your residual pricing.
What's residual pricing?
So like you hold it for X number of years and you sell it.
Oh, your exit price.
Sale. Yeah, exit. Yeah. So there's like residual pricing, market rent, maybe expenses, although those are usually a known quantity. Maybe they go, what are taxes? Are taxes going to go up? Where are they? You have to look at that.
Do you divide between fixed and variable expenses? Do you have separate sections for those? Because we just have, here are the expenses, and we don't tag them as fixed or variable.
Yeah, usually I don't. I'm trying to think in multifamily. I know with Argus, sometimes if you have enough vacancy, you might look at making utilities and cleaning costs. You can make those you can fix a percentage of those expenses so that they will go up with occupancy. I think with multifamily, you could do something similar to that. I'm trying to think of, I used to break out, it's been a while since I've really dug into a multifamily model, but I think, I remember breaking out taxes, insurance in one grouping versus more the utilities and all that. But yeah, to some degree, especially if it's a very distressed deal, or you're going in and putting a lot of capex into it, and then changing the market rents and just changing the entire kind of strategy of the investment, then you have to look at expenses scaling up with occupancy or that type of thing. But if it's 80%, 90% occupied, and you're just like bumping rents a little bit, and you're not worried too much about expenses scaling up, but you have to, those things you look at, and it's just different levels of detail, maybe not the first pass, but as you dig into it a little bit more.
And I guess for the audience, we should define fixed and variable expenses. Like fixed expenses would be generally your taxes, insurance, whereas variables would be your R&M cost, repairs and maintenance, your turnovers. I guess salaries are fixed, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, salaries are fixed, but then let's say you have a period of you're completely renovating the property for 12 months or whatever. Your salaries maybe look different than hiring a full-time property manager. So there's just a little bit of nuance there when you look at it. But yeah, in general, your salaries are going to be your admin costs. Your management fee is going to probably fluctuate with revenue, but maybe there's a minimum there. So you have to think through that as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And I was being facetious about why would somebody need you, because obviously it's a complicated thing, because you've got, okay, what's the income? What are we projecting income to grow at going forward? What's our, in my world, what's our loss to lease? What are the market rents? And then what are they actually getting? And then you've got things like, okay, if we're going to do a value add, you can't bucket that. If you're going to do it over 3 years, you can't bucket that whole increase in year one. You really have to layer it in over that 12-month period. Actually, those 36-month periods. Those are some of the nuances that we've run into.
Yeah. And then like, how aggressive do you want to get? How aggressive is a buyer going to be in terms of their kind of projections? And then how much are those assumptions? Does each assumption impact the valuation? Because let's say you have a three-year projection of the loss to lease burning off versus a 2-year, it's not really going to affect your valuation a whole lot. But let's say you have a residual, an exit cap rate of 6 versus a 5.5, that could move it a ton. Or if your market rent assumption projection is, I think rents are going to grow 5% for 3 years and then level off versus 3%, that could have a big impact on your valuation, but the loss to lease might not. So you have to think through as well, what assumptions really move the needle on this underwrite? And it's usually market rent, capital expenses, exit pricing, and maybe a couple others, but it's getting an intuitive feel for that. Because if you're an investor and you don't know what to, like, you're looking at a model, you don't have to be focused on every little expense, because I'm sure as you look at more and more deals, you get a sense, but just from a modeling perspective, moving some of the assumptions, maybe 3, 4, 5 of them, really make all the difference in that investment working or not working. And so it's knowing what those levers are, because that's really the difference between an investment succeeding or not succeeding.
Yeah. Have you seen deals that you've underwritten on the front end and then somebody goes and acquires it, and then you're looking at it again at the end of their hold period? And I'm curious, how have your modeling proved out in accuracy versus how life actually worked out?
Yeah. We've had that. We've had that with, I'm thinking of an example of an office deal. We underwrote an office deal, was maybe half vacant, or one of the towers was vacant, and I think it was pre-COVID, and then COVID hit and really took a hit. And I don't think the assumptions were wrong. It was just like COVID happened and nobody could predict it.
You can't predict that.
Yeah. Now, we typically rely on our clients, whether they're a brokerage firm or an investor, to know the market well enough to give us the assumptions, because we work all over the US. We rely on them for their market knowledge. And then it's really up to us to say, from a modeling perspective, if you move this assumption up or down, here's what happens, kind of thing. But we're taking the client usually at their word on the market data, and we don't really have the sense or the feel or really the data to second guess the client on the market knowledge. So really, we tend to stay in our lane in the analytics.
Will you pull like rent comps and sales comps as an aid to help your valuation hypothesis? I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, we can do that. We don't have a CoStar license because we're not asked to do that very often. Sometimes we do it, but usually, even if we talk to the client about it initially, they don't end up really relying on us for it.
Okay.
So we tend to take their assumptions and drop them in our model. And I don't know if that's because we're all over the country or if it's just because the clients usually have that kind of those resources in-house.
hmm I'm curious, you've probably seen hundreds of deals. What are some of the most like interesting deal structures that people have asked you to come up with?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. Yeah, it is interesting when I look at like niche asset classes. And then for the first time, and someone's got a really good business plan. Self-storage is big now, but I remember when it was, still more of a niche. And I just kept thinking like, how are people storing so much stuff? But yeah, in terms of unique deal, usually I don't see a ton of unique underwrites. Usually it's pretty vanilla in terms of people looking at the same things.
So what are the, I guess, then standard sort of terms that you tend to see?
Yeah, you're looking at a lot of value add. Usually things that we see and underwrite in the mid market or call it private capital world is there's some kind of like upside, whether it's I think we can bump the market rents. I think we can buy this class C, class B multifamily deal and turn the units at X, renovate the units with X amount of CapEx, and then rent. And then so mark to market strategies, lease up strategies. See it. We underwrite a ton of lease up strategies. No idea, especially in the office world right now, if they even make sense. But the model doesn't work unless you lease it up. So it's just, I would say, a lot of kind of light value add to core plus type underwrites where we think it's maybe a little bit undermanaged, or we think that with a little bit of capital infusion, a new debt package with some CapEx, we can bump the rents, bump the occupancy a little bit, and then exit 3, 4, 5 years and execute like an IRR that makes sense. So a lot of buy a little bit tired, put some capital into it, get out of it in 3, 4, 5 years.
Is it usually an exit that they're having you underwrite, or is it let's go in with a bridge and then refi that out and maybe take all the equity out?
Yeah, we both really. It's tough with a refi because you're just relying on the debt markets. It'd be hard to rely on that as an investment strategy. You almost have to think of it as if that happens, great kind of thing. But that's a real risk if you're relying on a refi, or even if we'll calculate, let's say the unlevered IRR for a deal is a 15. We'll calculate what percentage of that 15% is from the exit sale versus cash flow. And that's a really good indicator of risk in that model, because if you're just relying on that sale, but then you also have to look at the cash flows and how much of the cash flows is speculative versus contractual. Now, like multifamily, you only have like a year of contractual, but like how much of those cash flows are current versus mark to market cash flows. So things like that can tell you the risk in something that maybe doesn't look like super risky because it's a good location, or there are things you like about the deal. Could be riskier than you really think because your entire thesis is based on this exit sale. And the exit sale is based on debt being accretive in 5 years. Right. So can I sell at 5.5? Can I sell a multifamily deal 5.5 cap 5 years? Debt's got to be in the 5s for that buyer to come in. So you have to really think through how much of your model is based on an exit. Also the timing of that exit. Like you probably don't want to be underwriting like a 3-year hold. It's hard not to in like development deals, ground up development, but 3-year hold really compresses those IRRs and boosts them. So you have to almost evaluate, all right, 3-year hold would be great, but what if we end up holding this for 5 years? What does the IRR look like then? What does my promote look like as an operator? Would I be out of my promote if we hit some supply that we didn't expect, some competition in the marketplace, or the capital markets are still expensive in 3 year, end up holding for 5 years for whatever reason. Am I out of my promote? Will I be able to perform for the LPs kind of thing?
So when you're dividing the returns between IRR and the cash flow, is that looking at the cash on cash cumulative over different periods? And then you can see, okay, if we have a 15, but our cash on cash is running at 10 average over the life of the investment, that means the additional 5% is coming from the sale.
It's you take the 15, let's say, so from a modeling perspective, you take, let's say you're an unlevered 15% IRR on the 5-year hold. You take that discount, so the IRR is the same as your discount rate. So you take that 15% discount rate, you apply it to cash flows, and then you apply it to the residual sale, and then you see what the ratio is. And so if you buy it for $100 and your IRR is 15%, majority or minority or whatever percentage of that 15% IRR is made up of your cash flows versus your residual sale. Cash on cash, we look at more cash on cash with like single tenant deals or core, maybe core plus, but you've got real stable cash flows. You're doing light CapEx and your debt has got to be accretive, but we'll look at cash on cash more on kind of the stabilized deals, less so on the value add or the ground up. Maybe you look at the stabilized cash on cash for those to see where you end up. But as an investor, it's more about the IRR.
How do you determine what the discount rate is?
Yeah, it's really just depends on what the investor is looking for in the market right now. If I asked you what IRR or discount rate you would need on an office building, it'd be like super high, right? Because the perceived risk is there. There's a lot of uncertainty on supply versus like a multifamily deal or industrial deal where it's perceived as less risky. So you're not going to win any deals, and you're not going to win a multifamily deal that say value add or light value add multifamily with a 15 IRR unlevered. You're just not going to win any. You're not going to buy anything. So it's really just,
you might, but it's going to be small and it's going to be in real rough shape.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just like pricing. It's what buyers are willing to pay and where your competition is. And it's just one of the metrics too. Another thing, when I run a model, I usually look at it, no matter what the investment profile is, whether it's stabilized, not stabilized, ground up development, I'm looking at 3 or 4 at least kind of key metrics, even about IRR. Okay, at 15 IRR for this value add office building or commercial building. I'm also looking at return on cost. What's the stabilized NOI, and then what did it cost to get to that NOI, and then compare that to what the residual cap rate might be. So I'm looking at return on cost, I'm looking at the going in cap rate, I'm looking at the IRR. So they're all kind of playing off each other. And the IRR is really could be maybe the best one because it takes into account timing versus like equity multiple is another thing. A lot of investors want to see like at least a 2.0 equity multiple on the value
means
add.
If you put 100,000 in, you're going to get 200 back.
Right. Yeah, you double your money, but it doesn't take into account. So it could take you 10 years or 2 years. The equity multiple doesn't tell you that. So that you have to look at the equity multiple and the IRR. So you're looking at 3 or 4 kind of key metrics every time. Maybe the levered IRR is really good, but your unlevered IRR doesn't look super attractive, or your return on cost. And what happened when debt was so cheap, it really, you could argue that it led to inflated values because people could get a good levered IRR, but that levered IRR was dependent on that residual sale, which was dependent on the debt markets being the same as when you bought the deal. So it doesn't make any sense to only buy on a levered IRR.
It was all on the back end.
Yeah.
Right. And your cash flows were probably slim during your hold period, but you're like, I don't care. We're just going to make it up and sell it. We bought it at a 5. We're going to sell it at a 3.5.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Could you talk about again, let's assume we have maybe less experienced investors. Can you talk a little bit about or maybe for experienced investors also, but just the relationship between the debt markets and values and cap rates specifically? What do you tend to see there?
Yeah, right now the investors don't want to buy a cap, but they don't want to buy something with a cap rate that's below their interest rate. It's just partly perception, but also when your interest rate's higher than your cap rate, it's called negative leverage. So you're not increasing your returns by using debt, you're actually decreasing unless you can get that NOI higher, which is speculative. You don't have it today. So that debt really drives value in a lot of ways. Your in-place cap rate, your leveraged IRR, those are two really big metrics, your cash on cash. And the problem is, like we talked about, like you could buy something today that makes sense from maybe not today. A great example is when interest rates, say in 2021, early 2022, your interest rate was what, 3-4, or not even on an acquisition. So you buy a multifamily deal with debt in the threes and your levered IRR is in the mid-teens, but your projected residual cap rate, like you're saying, was a 5 or something crazy. And now you go to sell it and you can't sell it for that amount. And your debt term was only 3 years and you have to extend it, but you don't meet the extension requirements. So now your debt expense, your interest rates significantly higher. So and then you have to come out of pocket because the valuation of your
You're upside down.
You're upside down. So then to refi, you'd actually have to put in more equity. So that's how a lot of groups are getting in trouble, is they bought when things were cheap based on levered returns, not unlevered returns.
Yeah, that's called a cash in refi, which that's the opposite of what you want.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of experience in the sectors that I don't really touch. What are your thoughts on the state of the current office market? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I've seen some really good office buildings it's a really good time to buy office if you really know what you're doing, because you have to know the market, even sub-market, even like micro market down to the block, because within a competitive set, in theory, you could buy the best office building in a competitive set. Let's say amongst 5 or 6 office buildings that kind of compete. You could buy the best one there at a good price, and that office building will probably do well over time. But you have to know which one that is. You have to know the good from the bad, because some of the office buildings will never come back, and they're worth like the land. They're actually worth negative land value.
Yeah.
Because you've got leases on them, and you have to demo. So you've got some office buildings that are worth negative land value, and then you have some office buildings that are probably generational pricing that you couldn't get and you won't be able to get again for a long time. We'll look at deals that are like, let's say you look at the historical price per square foot over the course of the 20 years the office building's been, and it like goes sold for $100 a foot, and then the next guy bought it for 125, then the next guy bought it for 175, and now you can get it for 80. And so you look at that, and it may be a good investment, it might not. You have to know the market and the building, but it's really a good time if you really know office and you really know these little micro markets. You can do really well. If you don't, then you're just risk off, and most people are risk off.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen some headlines about these office towers that have sold for hundreds of millions of dollars now selling for 80 million, which is still a big number, but compared to 350 that it sold for before, it's, oh my gosh.
Yeah, the problem is they got hit with more expensive debt. Your TI, your tenant improvement costs are more expensive. Your leasing velocity is low. Like they got hit with 5 things all at the same time. Your residual pricing in your model is much lower. Your base building capital costs are higher. If you have to renovate the lobby or the bathrooms or whatever, that's higher. Your tenant improvement costs are higher. Your downtime between tenants is higher. You've got tenants downsizing. There's 6 or 7 factors all hitting your financial model at the same time. That's why something that was $200 a foot 3 years ago is now $80 a foot.
Jeez.
It's crazy.
What does it cost to build an office building these days?
That's a good question. I think it depends on suburban, urban, structured parking, but I'm guessing 350, 450. And then it depends on what's TI in there. And there's a lot of factors, and I haven't underwritten office ground up development in a while, but yeah, it's definitely up there to build something new and nice with structured parking and be really.
Yeah. I'd imagine that the safest office investments might be like medical office or things where if if you're a doctor, you can do online visits, but you can't get your teeth cleaned online.
Yeah.
So users that have to have people in the office is probably a reasonably safe investment.
Yeah, I would think medical office would be a different category for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then I just created a conversion model to convert office to multifamily. And we have a client that did that and was walking me through his experience. And it was a challenge for him. I ran the model on it, and I quickly realized why it's so hard to make it work, because even if you buy an office building for free, or $10 a foot, $20 a foot, the cost that you have to put in to convert it is so high that your reversion, you make the money. That's another example. You make all your money on the sale, because you buy it, you convert it, you're not making any money for a year or two, and then you have to lease it up, and then you have to sell it, let's say 3, 4, 5 years. That sale has to be really high to make up for all the costs that you put into it. So it's got to be really just the perfect kind of opportunity.
And with that, with development, I don't, in our market, and markets plural, like the Midwest, you really need some sort of tax incentive to get a deal done.
Yeah, you would need that.
Yeah, you need an abatement or a TIF, something like that. And those are not bad things, especially if they're going to help spur development or help cure a little bit of the housing crisis, right? But communities, a lot of them don't necessarily seem to understand that. And they think it's, oh, we're giving this developer all this money. And it's, yeah, but profit's not a bad word. And oftentimes what we've seen is that the value of that abatement, if we look at a discount rate on it, 5 to 7, that ends up being their spread, because otherwise it's a break-even proposition. And if it's a break-even, why would somebody do that? Out of the goodness of their heart for 2-3 years of stress and turmoil, and just to be a good guy, it's a frustrating thing.
Yeah, and you would need significant, based on what I was looking at in this model, you would need significant assistance to make the returns attractive to take on. It's a huge risk.
And the other thing with office conversions, people just think, oh, just carve up a box and put some kitchens and baths in. And no, that doesn't work. I was talking to a group here in town, and we've seen in our market, we've seen a lot of office conversions, both urban and suburban, but they bought I think it was one building in a larger complex. And what he was telling me is, even though you have an elevator in place and there's a sewer line, it's not sufficient. So they had to put a new elevator in, because this new one had to meet fire code. You had to get a stretcher in there. The sewer trunk wasn't big enough, so they had to replace that. And when I was growing up, my wrestling coach, when he knew we were going to get our asses kicked, he's, now this is a learning experience. And that's essentially what this guy told me. This has been a learning experience.
Yeah. It's tough. Yeah. It's not really a natural conversion office.
No, because the floor plates don't always work either.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your firm, who would you say your ideal customer profile is?
Yeah, it's really two kind of categories. It's the brokerage team that's selling, $5, $10, $20 million transactions, and they need senior level analysts to help them. I feel like financial analysis in the commercial real estate world, especially when you get below kind of the institutional groups, like the really large, the CBREs and then REITs that have a really full-time support, bigger teams. When you get into the private capital space, the financial analysis becomes, it's like almost have to do it kind of thing, versus I'm gonna use it to grow my business, grow my client relationships, figure out the best investments if I'm an investor. So our ideal is really groups that want that kind of higher level analysis, because we have senior level analysts who have experience within asset classes. We have team-based, so 2 or 3 analysts on a team at least. So you really get higher level kind of thought put in your underwriting. So it's groups that are really looking to be best in class as much as they can on the analytics. But it's the mid-market brokerage team that's really anywhere. We do a lot of work really in the Smile States for whatever reason. I don't know why haven't done much like in Boston. I don't think we've ever gotten hired in Boston or Seattle. For some reason, it's always California, a little bit in Portland, all the way up to DC, a lot in the Sun Belt, Texas, Atlanta. And it's that brokerage firm, kind of the market that knows their market, knows their niche. They're selling multifamily, they're selling retail, and they just, really got their market dialed in, their business plan. And then there's the investor, which is 1 to 3 or 4 people that are buying one specific asset class or multiple, or their ground up development, and they don't really have the need or the workflow to hire like a full-time person. Also, like when you hire that full-time person, you have to train them, and it can slow teams down. So we do really well with entrepreneurial groups. They've got pretty good workflow, or they want to increase their workflow, and we're a scalable kind of resource for them. So those 2 buckets.
We don't have to get into specific dollars, but do you charge on a per model basis, or is it a subscription? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a monthly subscription or hourly. So a lot of groups might start off hourly, but the monthly subscription, we drop the rate, and then it becomes a base rate with overage if you go over that month. And then hourly is just hourly, and we can, like, clients want to know especially initially when they start working with us, like what's the range going to be. So we'll give them like a range. And so we never want to surprise clients with an invoice. But yeah, I've done project before. It's really tough because you never know how many iterations you're going to do and how detailed it gets. So we do monthly and hourly.
So would you say that your services could replace an in-house analyst? Like for a brokerage
sure.
team?
Yeah, we do that, and we can do that with really anybody, because we replace an analyst with a team, and the team stays with you. You might have a lead analyst or 2, but 2 or 3 analysts on your team. And it really makes sense for the industry, because if one person's busy, somebody else can jump in. So in quick turnaround times is always a concern. And also, if you're let's say you're typically doing retail, but now you're looking at like a mixed use deal, we can bring in like a multifamily analyst to do, or, okay, usually I'm acquiring things, but I'm looking at this ground up development. Can you guys do that? Yeah, we have analysts that do more of that ground up development type work. So we can bring those templates in. So it's conducive for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. That's great. If somebody's interested in getting in touch with you and engaging your services, what's the best way to find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, and Val Despard, or email is always the best way, val.despard@despardanalytics.com.
Perfect. Val, I appreciate you joining me today, and it's been a great conversation, very technical, but great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too.
All right.
See you, Bob.